Hello, Gen Z. So you think the modern world is a bit tough and not to your liking, hey? Well, have I got news for you? Imagine this, if you can. You're doom scrolling your way through TikTok as you do all day, while sipping on your organic oat milk latte, when suddenly, boom, you're transported back to ancient Rome. The year is 50 BC. All of a sudden you see that there's no Wi-Fi available anywhere, and certainly no dumb phones, or should I say smartphones, or maybe doom phones, but whatever. And there were most definitely no participation trophies for coming last in your local running race. That's right, none of the modern luxuries which you take for granted today existed in ancient Rome. Dearie me, I can hear you squeaking already. Welcome back to Ancient Rome Revisited. I'm your host, Marcus Aurelius, the best boss the ancient Roman Empire ever had. And today, I'm going to explain exactly why you, the Gen Z peeps, would have the survival rate of a snowflake falling into a volcano if you were dropped into ancient Rome. So, button up your fluffy pajamas, grab your organic chai latte, and let's forget about doing any work for the next 20 minutes, okay? Gen Z, the Pajama Brigade. Now, before we dive into this generational bloodbath, let's first look at what modern research has to say about Gen Z, shall we? Recent studies have painted your generation as the laziest to ever grace this beautiful blue planet, which you're lucky to even be on. According to the internet, you suffer from the Sunday scaries whenever you start thinking about work the next day. And when you do get to work, you do what's called bare minimum Monday, which apparently involves focusing more on yourself and your own happiness than on the work that you're being paid to do. And when you're not happy at work, you resort to rage applying, whatever the hell that means. So, in light of this, here are 12 ways you Gen Z people would meet your doom in ancient Rome. First, a word of caution. By the end of this video, you might need a fresh change of clothes, or more likely, a new pair of fluffy pajamas, because shit's about to get real. 1. The Great Wi-Fi Withdrawal. Let's start with the obvious. You Gen Z kids, check your phone 144 times per day. That's once every 10 minutes while you're awake. In ancient Rome, the closest thing to instant communication was shouting really loudly across a field, or sending a slave, often a young person like yourself, to carry a message to the nearest kingdom, which often involved running through forests and being chased by packs of hungry wolves. Imagine trying to explain to a Roman citizen that you need to check your notifications, or that you're having FOMO about what's happening on the other side of the forum. They would have likely assumed that you were going completely mad or had become possessed by some demonic forces. To cure you, they'd probably prescribe you some wine mixed with lead, which was the standard solution to most of their daily problems. Without Wi-Fi, you would have been drinking a lot of this lead-infused wine on a daily basis in ancient Rome. Your withdrawal symptoms alone would be catastrophic. No Instagram stories to post about horrifying work conditions, no TikTok to document the cruel treatment you received for being a lazy sod, and definitely no Uber Eats to deliver your favorite final meal before being executed for working like you do on bare minimum Mondays. 2. No participation trophies. You Gen Z kids grew up in an era where showing up was enough to get a trophy. In ancient Rome, showing up to the wrong place because you can't read a simple map could result in your head being chopped off by the enemy. Romans didn't believe in participation awards. They believed in win or die awards, and the die part was often quite literal. Just imagine yourself as a gladiator in the Colosseum. Excuse me, Mr. Lion. I know we're supposed to fight, but I feel like we're both winners here, wouldn't you agree? Can we just say that we both tried our best and maybe split a smoothie bowl after this? The lion, who definitely didn't receive any diversity and inclusion training, would respond in the traditional Roman fashion, with teeth and bloodshed. Romans respected strength, courage, and results. They didn't care about your self-esteem, your personal growth, or whether the workplace was fair. If you couldn't perform, you were replaced faster than a broken chariot wheel. Your Gen Z concept of quiet quitting in Rome would mean, quite literally, being quietly murdered and thrown into the Tiber River, where you would become dinner for the wild animals. 3. The Great Dietary Disaster. You have more dietary restrictions than the entire Roman pantheon has gods. Gluten-free, dairy-free, organic, non-GMO, ethically sourced, carbon neutral. Romans would have absolutely lost their block when trying to understand what you want for lunch. A typical Roman meal consisted of bread, full of gluten, cheese, dairy, wine, fermented grape juice with questionable additives, and whatever animals they could catch and kill that day. No quinoa bowls, no almond milk, no Beyond Burgers or Impossible Meats. If you asked a Roman shopkeeper for oat milk, they'd probably assume you're talking about some kind of torture. Soon enough, you would starve to death, while trying to explain to the Romans the reason why you can't eat the perfectly good roasted boar is because it wasn't grass-fed with organic pasture, even though it was, you numpty. Meanwhile, the Romans would be placing bets on how long you could survive on just olive oil and philosophical rambles about animal ethics. 4. The social media influence apocalypse. For Gen Z, your entire self-worth is tied to likes, follows, and going viral. In ancient Rome, going viral meant you probably had the plague and were about to die a horrifying death. The concept of influencing people existed, but it usually involved either being an emperor or a really charismatic senator. And both of those jobs had remarkably high mortality rates. Imagine trying to explain to a Roman citizen that you're an influencer because 50,000 people follow your dance videos. They'd probably assume you're either a very successful prostitute or a cult leader. And honestly, both of those professions had better job security than your modern influencing career, unless of course you've already created an OnlyFans account, in which case, good luck, Sonny. Without the dopamine hit of constant social validation, you would experience what psychologists call existence crisis, which is what the Romans simply called Tuesday. Your inability to document every meal, every outfit, and every thought would leave you feeling like you don't actually exist, which, in ancient Rome, might actually be preferable. 5. The Work-Life Balance Massacre. You value work-life balance above almost everything else, right? Studies show that 42% of you value spending time with friends and family, remote working, and flexible leave as your top priorities when looking for a job. Romans had a different philosophy. Work until you die, and if you're lucky, die while working so you don't waste time transitioning between the two states. There was no Mental Health Day in ancient Rome. There was Died of Plague Day, Killed by Barbarians Day, and Trampled by Elephants Day. But definitely no mental health days. Your concept of work-life balance would be as foreign to Romans as the concept of a European holiday, which for you, Gen Z, would be nothing but an inescapable nightmare. If you asked for flexible hours in Rome, you'd be told you can have all the flexibility you want while dangling from a cross on the Appian Way. Remote work existed, but it was called being exiled to the frontier. and your commute would involve dodging Germanic tribes who wanted to use your skull as a drinking cup. Speaking of cups, how's your organic oat Frappuccino going down? You might need a quick refill, or possibly a sick bag, if you are to get through the next 6 reasons why you would perish and die in ancient Rome. 6. The comfort zone. Catastrophe. You Gen Z love your comfort zones more than Romans loved their bloody spectacles. Safe spaces, trigger warnings, and emotional support. These concepts would make Romans question whether you're even one and the same species. Roman entertainment involved watching people fight to the death for sport. Their idea of a safe space was being inside the city walls when the barbarians weren't attacking. Trigger warnings? The only warning you got was the sound of approaching cavalry, or the subtle hint that your emperor had gone completely insane again. You'd spend your first day in Rome asking where the counseling center is, where you can file a complaint about the noise levels in the forum, and whether there's a manager you can speak to about the overall quality of life. Romans would be so confused by your requests that they'd probably deify you as some new god of incomprehensible complaints. But you would have to die first, of course. 7. The technology dependencies disaster. You don't just use technology, you are technology at this point. GPS for navigation, calculators for math, spell check for writing, and apps for literally everything else you do. In ancient Rome, technology meant pointy stick and fire, and you were considered highly advanced if you could make both work together. Without Google Maps, you would be lost in Rome, literally. The city wasn't built on a grid system because Romans were apparently too busy conquering the world to worry about logical urban planning. Streets changed names randomly, buildings didn't have numbers, and your address was basically near the fountain, past the guy who sells fish, before you get to the temple where they sacrifice the goats. And too bad if you are crap at maths. Roman merchants would charge you triple if they caught you counting the cost of things with your fingers, with the panic in your eyes. Without spell check, your writing would result in Latin so butchered that the Romans might assume that you were an Egyptian. 8. The physical fitness fiasco. The Romans were physically fit because their lives depended on it. Walking everywhere, carrying everything, fighting regularly. It was like CrossFit, but with more deaths and fewer protein shakes. But you, Gen Z, bulk at the sight of having to walk up a flight of stairs. And God forbid that your Uber ride is more than 5 minutes away, forcing you to sit and wait. But thank God for doom scrolling, yeah? The average Roman soldier could march 20 miles a day, carrying 60 pounds of equipment, then build a fortified camp, then fight a battle, then march another 20 miles. But you, Gen Z, need a recovery day after assembling IKEA furniture. Roman fitness wasn't about looking good in toga pics for social media. It was about not dying when someone tried to stab you with a gladius. There were no gym memberships, no personal trainers, no fitness apps, just survival and the constant threat of being conscripted into the army where you'd either get fit or get dead. 9. The communication catastrophe. Yes, we know how much you like to communicate through emojis, memes, and abbreviations. But in doing so, you've reduced human language to such an efficient level that you can have entire conversations using just facial expressions and hand gestures, which, ironically, would have been perfect for ancient Rome, where they used hand gestures to signal things like, "Kill this gladiator, and I claim this person as my slave." If you don't know what I mean, then perhaps you need to watch the movie Gladiator. I love that movie. It reminds me of the good old days. Anyway, enough about me. Back to you, Gen Z. Okay, so here you are, trying to order food in Rome. Can I get a loaf of bread, please? But one that's gluten-free? If you asked this, the Roman baker would assume you're either speaking in tongues or placing a curse on his family. Either way, you would not be getting your bread today. Latin was the language of precision and formality. There was no LOL, no BRB, and certainly no YOLO. Romans spoke like they were constantly giving speeches to the Senate, even when asking for directions to the bathroom. Your casual communication style would make you sound like a barbarian to Roman ears. The authority issue, Armageddon. You Gen Z question authority, more than Socrates questioned his own existence. You've been raised to think critically, challenge systems, and speak truth to power. Noble qualities that would get you killed faster than you can say, Uber Eats. Roman society was built on strict hierarchical structures. You respected your elders, obeyed your superiors, and didn't question the emperor, especially if the emperor was having one of his "I think I'm a god" phases. And believe me, your concept of "okay, boomer" would be considered high treason, and if you dared to say this to your elders, they would call for your head. If you told a Roman senator that his policies are giving off toxic masculinity vibes, you'd earn a one-way trip to the gladiator school. And not the fun kind where you get to be like Russell Crowe pretending to be Maximus. Oh no, it's the kind where you become lion food on day one because you spent too much time explaining why violence isn't the answer to a hungry crowd of people who paid money specifically to watch you die. 11. The instant gratifications implosion. You Gen Z expect everything to be instant, right here, right now. Instant food, instant communication, instant entertainment, instant gratification. The Romans, on the other hand, understood that good things take time, like properly aging wine, slowly conquering barbarian territories, and carefully plotting your political rival's assassination. The Romans planned for decades. They built roads that lasted centuries, engineered aqueducts that supplied water for generations, and created legal systems we still use today. Whereas you, Gen Z, plan for the next TikTok trend, which typically lasts about 72 hours before being replaced by something even more incomprehensibly silly. 12. The final boss. Roman work ethic. Here's where we come full circle to our original point about your Gen Z work ethic. Studies show that 50% of you have rejected a work assignment because you didn't like the sound of it, and 44% rejected a potential employer based on your personal ethics. Well, in ancient Rome, rejecting a work assignment from your superior was called insubordination, and it was typically punished by creative methods involving wild animals and public entertainment, not to mention a sword to your head. The Roman work ethic was simple: work hard or die trying. Actually, even if you worked hard, you might still die, but at least you'd die with honor and possibly a small statue in your memory. Romans built an empire that lasted over 1,000 years through sheer determination and an absolute refusal to accept excuses. Your concept of quiet quitting in Rome would be met with actual quitting, as in quitting life. Romans didn't have the luxury of job hopping when things got tough. You were born into your social class, learned your trade, and stuck with it until death, disease, or barbarian invasion freed you from your earthly responsibilities. In all fairness, to Gen Z. So there you have it, 12 reasons why you Gen Z peeps would meet your doom in ancient Rome. Now, before you start getting all upset and typing angry comments, which, let's face it, you probably started doing around point 3. Let me be clear. This video isn't really about you being weak or lazy. every generation is a product of their time, adapted to survive, if not thrive, in their specific environment. You've developed skills perfectly suited for the modern world: digital literacy, social awareness, adaptability to rapid change, and the ability to process information at lightning speed. These are superpowers in 2025, but they would be utterly useless in 50 BCE. In all fairness, if we dropped a Roman citizen into your world, that is, the modern world as we know it today, they'd probably die from confusion within minutes. Imagine trying to explain cryptocurrency to Julius Caesar, let alone a smartphone. They'd assume it was some form of dark magic and probably have you executed for witchcraft, which, let's be honest, they were probably going to do anyway because Romans really enjoyed a good public execution. The real lesson here isn't that any generation is superior to another. It's that we're all perfectly adapted for our own time periods and would be hilariously inadequate in any other era. Romans couldn't handle modern life any better than you could handle ancient life. But hey, at least you would go down in Roman history books, probably in a chapter titled "The Strange Foreign People Who Died Asking for Wi-Fi Passwords." And honestly, that's probably better than most of us can hope for in terms of historical legacy. So the next time someone calls you lazy, just remember, you might not be able to survive in ancient Rome, but Romans couldn't survive a single day dealing with your student loans, climate change anxiety, and the constant pressure to have a personal brand. You're all just doing your best with the historically unprecedented chaos you've been handed. May the odds be ever in your favor, Gen Z, because unlike ancient Rome, the modern world is arguably more complex and difficult to navigate. I must now bid you farewell, Gen Z. But if you've enjoyed this episode of Ancient Rome Revisited, in which I've done my best to tease you about your work ethic and general reputation, then please join me in my other videos, and you'll see that life in the modern world ain't quite as bad as it seems. Who knows? I might even cure you of the Sunday scaries, and instead of bare minimum Mondays, you might find yourself turning into Mighty Maximus Mondays, where, like all good gladiators, you smash through your work so hard that your boss has no option than to grant you your modern-day freedoms like working from home. Godspeed, Gen Z. I'll see you in the next video.